Hello, my name is Mohammed Kimji. Book number 11 is going to be the beginning of a very long, very hard, very intense day of battle. Book number 11 begins with the rising of the sun. The last time we saw a book beginning with the rising of the sun, or the rising of the sun, period, was at the opening of book number 8. And so the length of time beginning between the opening of book number 8 and the opening of book number 11 is about one calendar day. And the day that begins in book number 11 is not going to end until the end of book number 18. Book number 19 begins with the rising of the sun. So one calendar day is the time between opening of book number 11 and opening of book number 19. On this day, the Achaians are going to have some successes, but it's also going to be a day in which they're going to suffer very major losses. This is how book number 11 begins. Now dawn rose from her bed to carry her light to men and to immortals. I'm jumping to line number 5. Actually, I'll continue reading. Zeus sent down in speed to the fast ships of the Achaians the wearisome goddess of hate. Hate here is personified as a goddess that will make hateful the Trojans to the Achaians, that will inspire the Achaians with hate, or that will possess the Achaians with hate. And hate holds in her hands the portent of battle. She, hate, took her place on the huge hollowed black ship of Odysseus, which lay in the middle of the Achaean fleet, so that she could cry out to both flanks, either as far as the shelters of Telamonian Aias or to those of Achilles, since these had hauled their balanced ships up at the ends, certain of their manhood and their hands' strength. And I mentioned previously, when the formation of ships, Achaean ships, was described, that Odysseus' ships are in the middle. At the ends are the fleets of the Achaeans' greatest fighters, Achilles and Aias. And I indicated that there was a purpose for this. If you put your strongest men at the ends, then it would force the enemy to avoid the ends when they attack and to approach maybe closer to the center. And that would allow the soldiers fighting at the ends to envelop or to encircle the enemy soldiers and ambush them. And so there was a purpose to this particular way of arranging the fleet. On this day, Agamemnon is going to show himself as a very powerful fighter. He's not going to be depicted as, or in the same way that Achilles depicted him in book number 1, almost as though Agamemnon was hanging back and he was waiting essentially for Achilles to do all of the work. Achilles is the greatest in warcraft. Agamemnon was just passively collecting the spoils. After Achilles defeated enemy soldiers, led the Achaeans to capture the spoils, and then Agamemnon would just take them and distribute them at his own discretion. It's not like that. Agamemnon here is presented as being one of the most powerful Achaean fighters. And in fact, at the opening of book number 11, he is the most powerful fighter on the battlefield. The longest arming scene in the Iliad takes place when Agamemnon puts on his armor. We have seen the arming scene of Paris in book number 3, and Agamemnon is going to be using much of the same weapons which are standard in fighting scenes in the Iliad. So the arming scene begins at around line number 17. He puts on the greaves. The greaves are the shin guards, protect the lower legs. He puts on the corselet at line number 19, around 19. The corselet protects the vital organs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the pancreas, the lungs, and it also allows the limbs to move freely. At line number 29, he puts on the sword. He slings the sword across his shoulders, and the sword is encased in the scabbard, the covering. He carries a man-enclosing stark shield at line number 32. That's a full body shield. He's wearing a helmet. The helmet has terrifying plumes on it. Feathers, tall feathers. And he's carrying 2 strong spears, we are told, at line number 43. Line number 45, auspicious signs come from Hera and Athena, who are on the side of the Achaians. And Hera and Athena caused a crash of thunder about him, doing honor to the Lord of deep golden Mycenae. Thereupon each man gave orders to his charioteer to rein in the horses once again by the ditch in good order, while they themselves dismounted and, armed in their war gear, swept onward. We know that in order for the Achaians to cross the ditch, they're going to have to go through the steep embankments or down and then up, right? That's what they wanted the Trojans to do. Not good for horses. Particularly, it's not good when there are stakes inside. Makes maneuvering quite difficult. So the Achaians have to dismount, lead their horses across before they mount again. Not only does Hera and Athena send a sign, but Zeus also sends a sign. It's actually much more frightening. It's blood dripping from the sky. At line number 53, from aloft, Zeus cast down dew dripping blood from the sky, since he was minded to hurl down a multitude of strong heads to the house of Hades. Elsewhere, Zeus is going to be described as essentially like a lion that rejoices in the pride of his strength as he is looking down, watching men killing and men being killed. And I'll have a few words to say about that when I get there in a moment. When the Achaians and the Trojans engage in battle, there are 2 similes that are used back to back to describe their engagement. The first is of a kind where so many people are dying, they are like grains of wheat or barley that are showering down on farmland when a combine cuts swathes across the field. This is the simile. At line number 65, and the men like 2 lines of reapers, crop harvesters, who, facing each other, drive their course all down the field of wheat or of barley for a man blessed in substance, and the cut swathes drop showering. These are the combine lines that cut a clear path across the field. Drop showering. So Trojans and Achaians, driving in against one another, cut men down. Nor did either side think of disastrous panic. The pressure held their heads on a line, and they whirled and fought like wolves. So the first simile, human beings are like grains of wheat or barley that are falling, just as grains of wheat or barley fall when wheat or barley are being harvested. A human being here doesn't have any value at all. I mean, the human being carries the same value as a grain of wheat. We've seen in book number 6 that Glaukos describes human beings, generations of human beings, as like generations of leaves. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing unique about them. There's nothing intrinsically valuable about them. As leaves come and go during the spring and fall, respectively, so human beings come and go. So this particular simile is consistent with that representation. The second simile is of the human being whirling and fighting, the human beings whirling and fighting like wolves. That simile has been given before as well. You get the sense that they are engaged in very, very tight quarters, grappling, teeth bared, extreme violence, growls, fur flying, blood spatter, very unstable. And while this is happening, Zeus is described as sitting apart from the other gods, simply watching the bloodshed. At line number 81, rejoicing in the pride of his strength, he sat apart from the others, looking out over the city of Troy and the ships of the Achaians, watching the flash of the bronze and men killing and men killed. What kind of God does this? What is the conception of the divine for the ancient Greeks? The divine is going to express that which human beings consider greatest or ideal. And here you have the king of the gods being represented as like a beast of nature that rejoices in blood. More importantly, what does the fact that human beings worship this God and represent him as the highest among the gods, what does it tell you about human beings? What does it tell you about their values, their ideals, what they think is right and wrong, what they think is good and bad? What does it tell you about how they conceive of their own lives and what is important? You see, when you look at a passage like this, what you're really looking at is you're looking at ancient Greek values through a magnifying glass. It's telling you something about ancient Greek consciousness, how they understood themselves, how they understood others, how they understood relationships, how they understood what it means to be human, how they understood what it means to live. What was the purpose of life? Agamemnon is going to have his finest moment on the battlefield. He's going to have his Aristeia. He's going to have his time of heroic valor, his time of dominance as a warrior. A very um, uh, gruesome image we are given at about maybe lines 93 onwards, where Agamemnon stabs at Oileus's face, and the spear goes right through the helmet to the bone. And we are told at about line number 97, 98, the brain splatters forth. I mentioned to you, I think it was in my discussion of book number 5, that the cruelty that is described is, on the one hand, normal. On the other hand, it celebrates, it shines a light on the power of the one who inflicts this cruelty on the enemy. It glorifies the hero who does this. And Agamemnon continues, causing devastation. At line number 101, then he went on to kill and strip of armor Isos and Antiphos, 2 sons of Priam. These 2 sons were actually once captured by Achilles. Achilles had released them for ransom, we are told. At line number 104 onwards. Before this, Achilles had caught these 2 at the knees of Ida and bound them in pliant willows as they watched by their sheep, and released them for ransom. This time they fall into the hands of Agamemnon, and Agamemnon kills them. At line number 113, and as a lion seizes the innocent young of the running deer and easily crunches and breaks them, caught in the strong teeth, when he has invaded their lair and rips out the soft heart from them, and even if the doe is very near, still she has no strength to help, for the ghastly shivers of fear are upon her also, and suddenly she dashes away through the glades and the timber, wearing in her speed away, sweating in her speed away from the pounce of the strong beast. So there was no one of the Trojans who could save these 2 from death, but they themselves were running in fear from the Argives. And Agamemnon will have many successes and dispatch many soldiers from the enemy side. There is a moment where Agamemnon is offered ransom by an enemy soldier. Let's actually read, right? Maybe at about 121. Next, he caught Pysandros and Hippolochus, stubborn in battle, sons of Antimachus the wise, who beyond all others had taken the gold of Alexandros, glorious gifts, so that he had opposed the return of Helen to fair-haired Menelaus. Powerful Agamemnon caught his 2 sons, riding in one chariot, who together guided the running horses. Now the glittering reins escaped from the hands of both of them, and they were stunned with fear, for against them rose like a lion Atreus' son, and they supplicated him out of the chariot, "Take us alive, son of Atreus, and take appropriate ransom. In the house of Antimachus the treasures lie piled in abundance." They're offering him a poina, bronzes there, and gold, and difficultly wrought iron. And our father would make you glad with abundant repayment were he to hear we were alive by the ships of the Achaians. Thus these 2 cried out upon the king, lamenting and in pitiful phrase, but they heard the voice of one who was without pity. If in truth you are the sons of wise Antimachus, that man who once among the Trojans assembled, advised them that Menelaus, who came as envoy with godlike Odysseus, should be murdered on the spot, nor let go back to the Achaians, so now your mutilation shall punish the shame of your father. Seems like the Achaians had once sent a delegation to Troy, and the mission failed. Here, Agamemnon is reminding them of what their father did. In ordering that Menelaus be killed on the spot at that time when the Achaians sent this delegation. Well, they paid, and they paid in full. How did they die? Let's look at some more gruesome scenes. 137. He spoke and spurned Pysandros to the ground from the chariot with a spear stroke in the chest, and he crashed on his back to the ground. Then Hippolochus sprang away, but Atrides killed him, dismounted, cutting away his arms with a sword stroke free of the shoulder, and sent him spinning like a log down the battlefield. Typical image, this dismemberment, and then the human being is described as like a trunk that is rolling. 153 onwards, powerful Agamemnon went onward, always slaying, and urged on the rest of the Argives, as when obliterating fire comes down from the timbered forest, and the roll of the wind carries it everywhere, and bushes leaning under the force of the fire's rush tumble uprooted. So before Atreus' son Agamemnon went down the high heads of the running Trojans. And in many places the strong-necked horses rattled their empty chariots along the causeways of battle. Now here Agamemnon is described as like a raging wildfire. Wildfires are very, very difficult to stop, even in the best of circumstances. In 2020, the wildfire in Australia destroyed some 46 million acres and millions and millions and millions of animals. And this is using the most modern technology to control it. So Agamemnon is absolutely lethal on the battlefield. We are told that the soldiers are lying along the ground to delight no longer their wives, but the vultures, right? They're going to be eaten up by the animals. They're not going to have the burial that is so important to themselves and to their families. Agamemnon is described as having hands that is invincible and spattered with bloody filth at line number 169. That's certainly not consistent with how Achilles presented Agamemnon in book number 1. Line number 170 onwards. When they had made their way to the Scaean gates and the oak tree, the Trojans stood their ground, and each side endured the other, while others still in the middle plain stampeded like cattle when a lion coming upon them in the dim night has terrified the whole herd, while for a single one, sheer death is emerging. First the lion breaks her neck, caught fast in the strong teeth, then gulps down the blood and all the guts that are inward. So Atreus' son, powerful Agamemnon, went after them, killing ever the last of the men, and they fled in terror. Men were hurled from behind their horses, face downward or sprawling under the hands of Atrides, who raged with his spear in the forefront. In the forefront, not hanging back. This kind of language is how Achilles will be described when Achilles is fighting. Zeus at this point gives his messenger god, Iris, a message to bring to Hector. And that message is not to engage Agamemnon in battle until Agamemnon Hector should not engage Agamemnon in battle, but there will come a time where Agamemnon is wounded and forced to withdraw. And when Agamemnon is wounded and forced to withdraw, then Hector will have his day. Then Hector will shine. We will see that that's going to be Hector's Aristeia, and it's going to last a fairly long time in the narrative of the poem. This is the message that Zeus gives to Iris at line number 186 onwards. Go on your way, swift Iris, and carry my word to Hector. As long as he beholds Agamemnon, shepherd of the people, raging among the champions and cutting down the ranged fighters, so long let him hold back and urge on the rest of the people to fight against the enemy through the strong encounter. But when either struck with a spear or hit by a flying arrow, he, Agamemnon, springs up behind his horses, then I guarantee power to Hector to kill men till he makes his way to the strong-benched vessels until the sun goes down and the blessed darkness comes over. When will the sun go down? Again, Book 18, line 241. Iris takes Zeus's message and follows through. She goes to Hector and she communicates line by line what Zeus told her to communicate to him. That happens at line 240 onwards, and I'm not going to read the message again, but there will come a time where Agamemnon will be wounded and Hector will enter the battle. Agamemnon continues to have success on the battlefield, and there is a moment where he kills Iphidamas. We are told that he strikes him on the neck at line number 240, and Iphidamas falls. Iphidamas's brother, Coon, is the one who tries to take revenge for Iphidamas and who wounds Agamemnon. He stabs Agamemnon at line number 252 with his spear at the middle arm underneath the elbow, and the head of the glittering spear cut its way clean through. Agamemnon will avenge, take vengeance on Coon. He will kill him, and he will then proceed to kill other fighters as well. But soon the pain will become too strong, and Agamemnon will be described as suffering pains like the pains that a woman in labor suffers. And eventually he needs to be taken out of the battlefield. Hector, at this point, line number 284, sees Agamemnon withdrawing, and he orders the Trojans to remember their furious valor. He says, at line number 286 onwards, Trojans, Lycians, and Dardanians who fight at close quarters, be men now, dear friends. Remember your furious valor. Be men, remember your furious valor. That's what it means to be a man. It means to be able to fight. It means to have courage in going into battle and putting your life on the line. What a odd, from a modern standpoint, conception of what it means to be a man. To be willing to kill others and thus be willing to be killed by them. This is one of the main functions, though, of men in this time. They would fight. The Greeks were very frequently at war. Well, Hector enters the battle, and he is described as being a man like the murderous war god at line number 295. We've seen previously Hector described as like a gorgon. And a gorgon was inhuman. A gorgon was like Medusa. When you looked at a gorgon, your face turned, you turned to stone. When you looked at a gorgon's face, you turned to stone. A terrifying, terrifying figure. The height of humanity of Hector was described as inhuman. Well, Hector kills several enemy fighters, kings on the Danaan side. At line number 305, as when the west wind strikes in the deepening world storm to batter the clouds of the shining south wind, so that the bulging big waves roll hard and the blown spume scatters high before the force of the veering wind's blast. So the mast heads high, so the mast high heads of the people were struck down by Hector. Heads are being scattered like spumes of salt water when the waves are crashing and the winds are very strong. Well, Agamemnon is wounded, and it's not going to be the first. It's not going to be the last of the Achaians who are Achaeans of distinction who are wounded. Diomedes will be next, and Diomedes will be wounded by Paris. This happens at about line 377, but I'm going to start at line number 369, 368, maybe 369. Alexandros, the lord of lovely-haired Helen, pulled his bow against Tydeus' son. 373. Now Diomedes was stripping the corselet of strong Gastrophos from about his chest and the shining shield from his shoulders and the heavy helm, as the other pulled his bow at the hand grip and shot, and the arrow escaping his hand flew not vain, but struck the flat of the right foot, and the shaft driven clean through stuck in the ground. Alexandros, having hit Diomedes, starts gloating, and Diomedes mocks him as having shot an arrow that merely scratched him. He says to him at line number 385, "You archer." That's an insult, because archers aren't fighting in the thick of battle, which is why it's not common to find the Achaians described as archers or as carrying a bow and arrow. "You archer, foul fighter, lovely in your locks, ire of young girls. If you were to make trial of me in strong combat with weapons, that is in close fighting, your bow would do you no good at all, nor your close showered arrows. Now you have scratched the flat of my foot." The arrow has gone right through the bone. "Now you have scratched the flat of my foot, and even boast of this. I care no more than if a witless child or a woman had struck me. This is the blank weapon of a useless man, no fighter. But if one is struck by me only a little, that is far different. The stroke is a sharp thing and suddenly lays him lifeless, and that man's wife goes with cheeks torn in lamentation." That's a standard of mourning, standard expression of mourning, where the woman would gash herself when her husband, for example, died. "And that man's wife goes with cheeks torn in lamentation, and his children are fatherless, while he, staining the soil with his red blood, rots away, and there are more birds than women swarming about him." Odysseus takes the arrow and he literally pulls it out of Diomedes' foot. The arrow point obviously is such that when you pull it out, you actually open the wound. But after Odysseus does this, Diomedes not able to continue fighting, and he calls to his charioteer, and the charioteer takes him back to the ships. Second major loss on the Achaean side. Now Odysseus is left alone, and the Trojans surround him. They pen him in. And he's going to be the third major Achaean fighter to be wounded. This is how Odysseus is described when he's penned in. As when closing about a wild boar, the hounds and the lusty young men rush him, and he comes out of his lair in the deep of a thicket, grinding to an edge the white fangs in the crook of the jawbones. As these sweep in all around him, and the vaunt of his teeth uprises as they await him, terrible though he is, without wavering. So closing in on Odysseus, beloved of Zeus, the Trojans rushed him. Odysseus, despite the fact that he is in such a difficult situation, still manages to kill many fighters when they rush him. But eventually he too is wounded by a man named Sokos. And that happens at about line 435 to 437. Odysseus is stabbed in the shield by Sokos' spear. All the way through the glittering shield went the heavy spearhead and crashed its way through the intricately wrought corselet, and all the skin was torn away from his ribs. Much like Agamemnon killed Coon after he was wounded by Coon, Odysseus kills Sokos after he's wounded by Sokos. This happens at line 446 onwards. Sokos, turning from him, was striding in flight, but in his back, even as he was turning, the spear fixed between the shoulders and was driven on through the chest beyond it. But Odysseus is wounded seriously enough where Odysseus himself needs to be removed from battle. And he is taken away by Menelaus. Alexandros now scores his second major hit in this book alone, and this time he wounds the physician of the Achaean army, Machaon. This happens at lines 505 onwards, where Alexandros hits Machaon with a 3-barbed arrow in the right shoulder. What could be more important in an army than a physician? In this particular case, Machaon needs to be removed from battle. And this time, it is Nestor who takes him towards the ships. Hector, of course, knows that the Achaians are in complete disarray right now. And he is going to be described in ways that indicate that Hector is slowly turning the momentum. Alexandros scores his third major hit in book number 11, when he shoots an arrow and strikes Eurypylus in the right thigh. That happens at about line number 580 to 582. Line number 595. So they fought on in the likeness of blazing fire. And meanwhile, the horses of Neleus, this is the horses that Nestor is riding, carried Nestor away from the fighting and carried also the shepherd of the people, Machaon. And when they are riding back to the ships, Achilles sees that the one who has been hit seems to be Machaon. Achilles is clearly watching what is unfolding on the battlefield. He has never left to go home to Phthia, as he threatened he would. Now, swift-footed, brilliant Achilles saw Machaon and watched him, Nestor taking Machaon back to the ships, and watched him, for he was standing on the sterns of his huge hollowed vessel. He seems once again to be consumed by war. His removal, the fact that he has removed himself from battle, does not mean that he has given up on attaining honor. The reason he removes himself from battle is to win honor. And when he sees Nestor taking Machaon to the ships, he speaks to Patroclus, his closest companion, and commands Patroclus to find out if this man is really Machaon. He tells him at line number 607 onwards, "Son of Menoetius, you who delight my heart, O great one, now I think the Achaians will come to my knees and stay there in supplication, for a need past endurance has come to them." That's what he wants. He wants the Achaians to come to him in supplication. But he rejected the emissaries in book number 9, who were trying to present the Achaians as supplicating Achilles. Phoenix even presented Agamemnon as supplicating Achilles. The gifts were gifts of supplication. Presenting Agamemnon as worshiping Achilles like a mortal does a god. But Achilles refused. But he tells Patroclus at 610, "But go now, Patroclus, beloved of Zeus, to Nestor, and ask him, who is this wounded man he brings in from the fighting? Indeed, seeing him from behind, I thought he was like Machaon. But I got no sight of the man's face, since the horses were tearing forward and swept on by me." And Patroclus, we are told, obeyed his beloved companion and went on the run along the shelters and the ships of the Achaians. And Patroclus is going to go to Nestor's shelter. Now, just this language about Patroclus obeying Achilles is interesting. It's a small note, but it's significant because it suggests that the relation between Achilles and Patroclus is a relationship between one who orders, one who commands, and one who obeys. They're friends, but it's not a friendship that you and I would call friendship. It doesn't express a relationship in which each side understands the other as his equal. Definitely not. And you will see this come out very, very strikingly in a very critical book in the Iliad, book number 16. It doesn't take Patroclus long to reach Nestor's shelter. In terms of the narrative space in the Iliad, in the Lattimore translation, Patroclus leaves to go to find out if this man is Machaon, as Achilles instructed, at line number 616. He arrives at Nestor's shelter only 27 lines later, at line number 643. And he sees that, yeah, this is Machaon. And he wants to go back to bring the news to Achilles. So at line number 649, the text reads, Patroclus says, I myself know and I see it is Machaon, the shepherd of the people. Now I go back as messenger to Achilles to tell him. But Nestor wants to work on him. And he holds him back. He says to Patroclus at line number 655, Now why is Achilles being so sorry for the sons of the Achaians, who have been wounded with spears thrown, he who knows nothing of the sorrow that has risen along the host? Since the bravest are lying up among the ships with arrow or spear wounds. The son of Tydeus, strong Diomedes, was hit by an arrow. That happened when Paris struck him. And Odysseus has a pike wound. That happened when Socos struck him. And Agamemnon, the spear famed, Coon wounded him. And Eurypylus has been wounded in the thigh with an arrow. Again, Paris struck him. And even now, I have brought this other one, Machaon, out of the fighting, hit by an arrow from the bowstring, Paris. Meanwhile, Achilles, brave as he is, cares nothing for the Danaans nor pities them. Is he going to wait then till the running ships by the water are burned with consuming fire for all the Argives can do, till we ourselves are killed off one after another? Since there is not any longer in my gnarled limbs the strength that there once was. If only I were young now, and the strength still steady within me. At that time when, and Nestor is going to once again recount his heroic exploits in battle. Much like he did in book number 1, he's going to lay claim to honor. He wants Patroclus to know that Patroclus ought to obey him, Nestor. And so he recounts the people he killed, the people he fought with, the battles he was in. Nestor had 11 brothers. All of them are dead. Nestor alone survived. And he goes on and on and on for several pages. He describes himself as fighting like a black whirlwind at line number 746. And I'm going to skip over to maybe 760. Nestor says, all glorified Zeus among the gods, but among men, Nestor. Right? Nestor is speaking about himself as winning the kind of distinction that no other mortal won. You see, because in order to persuade Patroclus to obey him, he has to show himself to have the kind of distinction that deserves obedience. And he tells Patroclus, after recounting the exploits of his past, at line number 761, that was I among men, if ever it happened. But Achilles will enjoy his own valor in loneliness, though I think he will weep much, too late, when his people are perished from him. Dear child, surely this was what Menoetius, your father, told you. That day when he sent you out from Phthia to Agamemnon. We two, brilliant Odysseus and I, were inside with you and listened carefully to everything that he told you. And now Nestor is going to remind Patroclus of the words of Patroclus's father, the instructions his father had given to Patroclus. This is the tactic that Odysseus used on Achilles to win him in the battle at the embassy meeting. And this is the tactic that Phoenix also used to Achilles, presenting himself as like a father and how Achilles ought to obey him. And Nestor will do this to Patroclus. And he says to Patroclus at line number 782 onwards, Peleus the aged was telling his own son, Achilles, to be always best in battle and preeminent beyond all others. But for you, Menoetius had this to say, and this is what Patroclus' father told Patroclus. My child, by right of blood, Achilles is higher than you are, but you are the elder. Yet in strength he is far the greater. You must speak solid words to him and give him good counsel and point his way. If he listens to you, it will be for his own good. This is what the old man told you. You have forgotten. What is Nestor doing? He's telling Patroclus that your father had told you that while Achilles is stronger in battle, you must be the one to give counsel because you are the older. And by implication, Nestor is communicating to Patroclus that as Patroclus is older than Achilles and Achilles should listen to Patroclus, so I, Nestor, am older than you and you should listen to me. He continues at 793. If he is drawing back from some prophecy known in his own heart, and by Zeus's will, his honored mother has told him of something, let him send you out at least, and the rest of the Myrmidon people follow you. And you may be a light given to the Danaans, and let him give you his splendid armor to wear to the fighting, if perhaps the Trojans might think that you are he, and give way from their attack. Right? If Achilles is not fighting, at the very least, let Achilles give you, Patroclus, Achilles' armor, so that when you go in the battle, the Trojans will think that you are Achilles, they will shrink, they will withdraw, they will be on the defensive, and that will allow the Achaians to mount an attack. Well, Patroclus, after hearing Nestor's words, leaves to return to Achilles' ships. And as he is on the way to Achilles' ships to bring to him the message, and I should mention that while the narrative distance between Patroclus leaving Achilles' ships to his arrival at Nestor's ship was only 27 lines, the amount of time that it will take from Patroclus to arrive from Nestor's shelter to Achilles' ships will be several books. He's not going to arrive at Achilles' ships until the opening of book number 16, a very, very critical book. So there's a lot of things that the poet will describe happening between the time he leaves Nestor's shelter to the time he arrives at Achilles' ships. Along the way, on his way back to Achilles' ships, Patroclus comes across Odysseus' ships, which tells you that Achilles' ships are at one end, Odysseus' ships are in the middle. Nestor's ships must be between Odysseus' ships and Aias' ships. If on his way back to Achilles' ship, he passes by Odysseus' ships. That's actually not consistent with what we found in book number 10. It seems like it's not consistent because in book number 10, Nestor had said that Aias' ships are the furthest from us. But here, Nestor's ships clearly are positioned between Odysseus' ships and Aias' ships. Well, on his way back, Patroclus comes across Odysseus' ships and he sees Eurypylus, who was wounded by Paris in the thigh with an arrow. And Eurypylus stops him. And he says to Patroclus, at line number 622, "No longer, illustrious Patroclus, can the Achaians defend themselves, but they will be piled back onto the black ships. For all of those who were before the bravest in battle are lying up among the ships with arrow or spear wounds under the hands of the Trojans whose strength is forever on the uprise. But help, save me now, at least, leading me away to my black ship, and cut the arrow out of my thigh, wash the dark blood running out of it with warm water, and put kind medicines on it." And Patroclus does do that. He knows he's in a rush to go to Achilles, but we are told that he takes the knife at line number 643, cuts the sharp tearing arrow out of the thigh, and washed the black blood running from it with warm water, and pounding it up in his hands, laid on a bitter root to make pain disappear, one which stayed all kinds of pain, and the wound dried, and the flow of blood stopped. Book number 16 will be the next very, very critical book. It's going to mark a turning point in the Iliad. My name is Mohammed Kimji. If you are at all interested in connecting with me, keeping in touch, please contact me on LinkedIn. And thank you for your time.